next speaker will be Dr. Kate Barger Weathers, and she holds a degree in animal science, poultry science, and Spanish from NC State, a veterinary degree from NCSU, and a specialty in avian medicine from UNAM in Mexico. Oh, UNAM? Also, I don't think the TN visa is Tennessee. Sorry about that. But after 20 years as a global welfare director for a primary breeder company, she now leads her own consulting business, helping clients advance measurable outcomes in poultry health and welfare. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Kate Barger.
All right. Thank you all for agreeing to let us carry on. I know we're a little bit behind time, and I'm going to try to get us caught up. But if you need coffee, if you need a bagel, fruit, please help yourselves. And I'm going to get started. Hopefully, we're going to have a little bit of sound here with this presentation. Drag that down. Drag it down. No. All right. Well, I am thrilled to follow two great speakers. And hopefully what I'm going to share today is a bit of my global perspective from boots on the ground. I work primarily with poultry, and within the poultry space, primarily work with broilers and breeders. And that spans everything from about 20 years with primary breeders to now I do a lot of work in processing plants and hatcheries and with broiler companies in different parts of the world. So for those of you all that don't know me, I am a Southern girl, and I think Shauna sent me a message. I was probably overseas at that moment, and she said, I need a title and I need a description. And I thought, I'm gonna be a little cheeky, to use the British term, a little funny. And so the title of my presentation was What the Cluck? And for those of you all that know me, you know that from a fowl language veterinary perspective, that was a little bit of a pun and a play on words. And so I am going to let you know that I'm fluent in fowl language, i.e. poultry, and I am not going to use lots of other types of words. I laugh with Dr. Walker because she and I have a catch up all the time on the phone, and I think one of these days my next layer of filter is probably going to drop off, and I will use some more colorful language like she does when I'm being very honest with some farmers. But for the moment, we're going to talk about fowl language, and I want you all to hopefully take a ride with me through some different places in the world where I've worked with poultry. Okay, so first thing, for those of you all that I have a 6-year-old, and so we like to read a lot of books, and one of the books is How Animals Talk in Different Parts of the World. So I thought that was really interesting to just kind of throw this up here, that what we think of a cluck cluck or cock-a-doodle-doo, that is very much how we think chickens talk to us, but in different parts of the world, they use very different ways of explaining how those chickens talk. So for those of you all that ever work with kids, it's really interesting to just see what their perception is of, does a cow say moo or does a chicken say cheep cheep, and how they describe that. So the reality is that I've had the pleasure of working in many different parts of the world. This picture here on the top right, that was back in my red hair and a little bit less gray days. That was at UNAM, and so Inker is here. He was actually a colleague of mine, a classmate in Mexico many years ago. It was great to connect with him this morning. And other places around the world that I've been, from Central and South America, parts of Asia, and even talking about poultry welfare and poultry health in the halls of Washington, D.C. this summer with congressional leaders. So it's been a real pleasure. And so when I talk about being bilingual, English and Spanish are the two languages that I speak fluently. But when I'm in South Alabama, I say that I speak a good bit of Southern as well. And then I spent about 2.5 years in the UK. And so occasionally I have to remember to use my British English and talk about sheds instead of chicken barns or chicken houses. So In my work now in Latin America, it's really fascinating because although everybody speaks Spanish, there are lots of different words. So there are about 5 or 6 different words to describe what we commonly refer to as the chicken barn or the chicken house. So you have to kind of remember which word to use in which part of the world where you're working. But it's been a real pleasure and an honor to travel around the world. Okay, so Dr. Jen talked a little bit about how do we define welfare, but I'd like to kind of add to that and say, what does welfare mean to you? For those of you all that work with poultry, those of you all that work with cattle, work with swine, perhaps work with other species, what does animal welfare mean to you on a day-to-day basis? How do you live that out? How do you communicate that? How do you put that into action? How do you put that into decisions? And I think that's sort of the boots on the ground, as this conference is termed, is how do we really think about living out animal welfare? It's not just having a protocol or not just having a written program, but it's really how do we live that? And my question to you is also for those of you all that have been in the business for a while, and particularly those of you all that are veterinarians, is how has that changed over time? I've been working as a poultry veterinarian for over 20 years. And my perception of welfare, my thinking process for welfare has certainly changed over time. And for those of you all that are students in graduate programs, I think that you'll find that that may change in your future as well. Okay, so we're going to take a brief walk in my boots, and we'll start here with my first steps as a veterinarian. So I graduated from NC State and then went to Mexico and was in Mexico City. And then worked in southern and northern Mexico on some different experiences there with the industry. And so when I went through vet school, we were talking at dinner last night, I had very, very little education in welfare. And I suspect looking around the room at some of you all that are veterinary colleagues, you would agree with that. We had perhaps a little bit on behavior, but we had honestly very little welfare training in veterinary school per se, and perhaps even less when we were in undergrad. So it's great to hear that Dr. Weimer is teaching an undergrad class on welfare and has students actually focused on that. But a lot of times from a veterinary perspective, we were taught to focus on the facts, focus on the science, thinking about the disease state or lack thereof, and then what would we going to do from a treatment process. And over time, I think we've changed, or at least I've changed, and that's to more of a qualitative. And that comes to what Dr. Walker was talking about, that with that quality of life. What is the preference? What's the motivation? What is the focus on opportunity for the animal to actually choose and to have a good life? Even if it's a broiler chicken that's going to live for 35 days or 48 days on a farm before it goes to processing, we still want the animal to have a good life. We don't just want to have it be free of diseases. And to continue to grow in. And so I think a lot of that change has happened for me, and I think for a lot of the welfare sector, whether it's supply chain partners or academics or those of us that were responsible for implementing programs, it's really changed how we think about and how we implement welfare. The other thing that's changed is really moving from that 5 freedoms and the absolutes, free from this, or free to do this, and that's really to that spectrum of outcomes. I think both of these have value, but as was mentioned by the prior 2 speakers, you can think about these frameworks, but really how do you implement that? How do you bring that to a reality on a day-to-day basis? And so you'll see in some future slides where I'm going to focus more on the domains where we think about nutrition, environment, health, behavior, and that mental state. So if we think about what happens in the life of the chicken, this was a graph that I adapted from an equine model, looking at the 5 domains, and what that horse in that case experiences, but I modified this for chickens to say what might be a negative experience in the day of a chicken or what might be a positive experience in the day of a chicken. And so you can see here simple things like walking through a flock to check it in that barn. We're going to disturb some birds. That's going to be a little bit stressful, maybe a little bit of a negative experience, but if I do it carefully, thoughtfully, and I'm not moving through too fast and making those birds extra flighty, hopefully that's going to be a minimal negative experience and that bird can return to sort of a neutral state there. Resting would be neutral, sleep would be there. But what happens if we have a fan that all of a sudden the belt gets loose? And so we hear a lot of that noise, particularly at night in a pullet barn, when those lights are off and the birds are hearing that clack, 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 or something like that, or a feed truck comes on and they're not expecting that noise of the boom coming over. That can be a negative experience as well. But we really have to think about what we're doing and what matters to the birds, and is it the same for all? There's some really smart folks that I get to talk to on a regular basis, and we talk about the differences in what a chick behavior is, what a broiler behavior is, what's a pullet behavior versus a hen and rooster. They're all chickens, but they all express very different things depending on their life stage, depending on their age, and perhaps the motivation and the preference for that could be quite different. So I encourage you all to think about that, is how do our actions or our decisions impact welfare, and how does our daily care impact where the birds are or where the animals are on that spectrum? Maybe. There we go. So if we wanted to highlight some items, and I'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation as well, is if we wanted to improve scratch feeding, or we could use scratch feeding, for example, to encourage the birds to forage. We do that a lot in breeder houses. In the afternoon, we want the birds to mix in that scratch area, so we walk through a barn, and we actually put some feed out there, and so it causes the birds to not only move the litter, which can be a great thing from a welfare aspect, but it also encourages what we think is that positive behavior. Flock checks. I work with some really interesting folks, both in the US and in Europe, that are looking at robotics, camera, and sound technology. What is happening in that barn when the farmer's not there? The farmer, right before he goes to bed, and he says, really want to know how my birds are doing, but I don't want to walk down, or I don't want to get on the gator and drive down to the barns, and I don't want to have to shower in or change in. I just want to check and see how they're doing. This technology, I think, will allow us to do that in a very non-invasive, non-disturbing way. Is it going to replace the farmer? Is it going to replace the importance of stockmanship? Absolutely not. But is it going to give us more clues to what's going on, the activity level, the distribution of the animals within that space, especially when we're not there? I think that future's coming. Am I saying that we need that right now? Maybe not, maybe yes, I don't know. But I think that is the future of welfare, how that's going to continue to evolve and change. And then I think there are things that are being done here and tested with regards to choice lighting, how those birds rest. And we have Dr. Sang in the back, who's been very involved with some of that research and looking at not only the bird activity, do the birds choose to rest in dimmer or dark areas and choose to be active in lighting areas if we have choice lighting within a broiler barn, but also how does that affect the biology and the neurophysiology of those birds? I think we're learning a lot about not just behavior, but how does that impact those birds from a biological standpoint. So for those of you all that are veterinarians in the room or veterinarians online, if you're like me and you graduated somewhere before the year 2010, you may or may not remember taking your veterinary oath when you graduated. But when we all graduated, the items here in blue were not part of that veterinary oath. For Dr. Brooke there, who graduated relatively recently, and Dr. Laura, you all had this in your veterinary oath. I talked about this last night with the group at dinner, and I think this is a fascinating aspect. It doesn't mean that welfare wasn't important when I graduated 2 decades ago, but it emphasizes the importance of welfare for veterinarians now. And so for those of you all that are veterinarians in the room, I encourage you to think about how are you living out not just the protection of animal health, but also the protection of animal health and welfare. What are we doing not just to provide relief to animals, but also to prevent harms to that animal? And I think that's an interesting evolution that's happened within the veterinary profession that I thought would be good to include today, since we're talking about welfare from the veterinary perspective. All right, so if you all will bear with me, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes in just a minute. You do not need to close your eyes for 5 minutes unless you're needing a nap. But I want you to think about what chickens are telling you, okay? So for those of you all that work with poultry, you're probably used to walking into a house, or before you even walk in a house, you're going to listen from the door. And I want you all to think about that, okay? So this is what I call the 5-gallon bucket exercise. I'm of the school that some of the best sensors out there are a 5-gallon bucket or an opportunity to go sit in a barn on slats and just look and listen and observe what the birds are doing, where they are, what that health looks like from a visual aspect, what the welfare state of those birds looks like from an activity aspect, what is the environment like, what's the nutrition provision, both feed and water. All right, so bear with me. If you all will close your eyes. Those of you all online, you can do this as well. I'll tell you when to. So my question to you is, if the animal cannot talk to us, how can we learn about what they need, want, and require? Actually, you can open your eyes. I moved this slide. So 2 quotes. This one we used in vet school, and this was from Ben Franklin, or was attributed to Benjamin Franklin, and that is, tell me and I'm going to forget, teach me and I may remember, but involve me and I'm going to learn. So as we went through veterinary school and we learned about surgery, we saw surgery, and then we actually got to do surgery, we lived that out. And I think that's part of welfare as well, is I can tell you about behavior of a bird. I can show you videos, which I'm going to do in just a minute, but if you actually go and use that 5-gallon bucket test and you sit in the barn and you observe, you're going to learn something, and hopefully you're going to start to think about it. The other quote that I'll quickly share is from Albert Einstein, and that is, wisdom is not a product of schooling, but of the lifelong attempt to acquire it. So a lot of us that are speaking to you all today were in school for a very long time. Some of you all are still in school. But I like to tell students when I talk with them that the real learning starts when you leave the academic institution and you really start to put into practice and you figure out what you can do in the real world. So bear with me about that today as we think about how animals talk to us. All right? So now close your eyes and just listen. A bit of a goat in there for those of you that like minutes. Okay, open your eyes now. Heard chicks, you've heard the cluck cluck, what the cluck, probably heard roosters. Okay. So when we think about sound and birds talking to us, those birds or those cows or those pigs are telling us something about their comfort level, that positive or negative experience, what's going on. Are they communicating to their pen mates or their flock mates? But I think a lot of times if we look and we listen, we can start to connect those dots between behavior and sound. And I will tell you that I'm not Dr. Doolittle. I don't pretend to be. But a lot of times my dad and I, my dad has a PhD in chemistry and is a long-suffering farmer, so to speak, and now retired from farming, but he would say, how do you know if the animals are happy? And so we talk about cows a lot because my dad was a beef cattle farmer. And so we talk about cow behavior and chicken behavior, and it's led to some fascinating discussions. But I would encourage you all to think about what you know about behavior, what you know about what those animals are telling you, like that. So here we have a breeder barn. Keep your eyes open, and we're going to listen to the roosters, listen to the hens. Okay. Again, you can sit on the slats or sit on that 5-gallon bucket and think about what does that environment look like? What's the nutrition for those birds? Water provision, what's their behavior, what's their health? And hopefully have a better understanding of that welfare status. Do we have positive experiences for those birds? What can we do to perhaps enhance their quality of life and the life that they are living in there? Okay? All right. How about watching these 2 videos? We're going to listen and watch. This is the same barn. This was a farm that I visited a few months ago. And I want you to look at the bird behavior. I don't know if we're going to be able to hear the sound, but look at the bird behavior in the picture on the left versus the picture on the video. Okay, short videos, but what did we see? We see a little bit more wing flapping on the left. Saw a little bit more flightiness on the left. I don't know if you all were able to pick that up. But what happened was with this particular crew, they turned on the lights when they were putting all the equipment in. And we said, no, 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 let's turn off the lights. And so the behavior was instantly different for those birds that were getting ready to be caught and transported to the plant. So simple things like the actions and the decisions that we take as people can make a big difference in the behavior and the experience that those birds have and certainly their environment. So when Dr. Jen talked about it's not just audits, it's really the people and how people are carrying the actions, I think this was a good example of that. All right, so my next question for you all, is there a perfect model for welfare, for productivity, for sustainability? Can we tie it all together? Hopefully you all know the answer to that if you paid attention to the first two talks. And so that's gonna bring me on my next journey point, and that is I have two passports and I'm ready to travel. And people always ask me and they say, well, which country has the best beaches in Central America? You go to all of them regularly. And I'll say, I don't have a clue. I've never been to a single one, but I've been to lots of beautiful farms in the wilds outside of the capital cities and to plenty of other operations. Okay? So the reality is that I'm gonna do for you today is highlight some differences in different parts of the world. And I want you to think about these pictures as I show this to you and emphasize that there are lots of different ways of doing, of farming chickens, providing for their care, thinking about their welfare. There are always pros and cons. And there are short-term and long-term wins and progress points that we can think about in all these different examples. Okay? I'm not going to tell you which one's the best. I'm not going to give you specifications on what you need to do. And I'm not going to guarantee that any of these farms that I show you today are going to be able to be in operation or be super successful in another 5 or 10 or 20 years. Okay? So let's look at this slide. So just to walk you through a little bit of where we are in the world. So here we are in Southeast US. Here we are in Central America. This is Russia. This is South Africa. And this is the Middle East, Egypt. Okay, lots and lots of different environments, lots of different health risks or disease incidents in those different countries. Predation risks are going to be different. Legislative expectations, particularly when we talk about Europe, are going to be very different than some parts of the world. Input requirements, so what they have to do with regards to stocking density, with regards to lighting intensity, for example, are going to be different in different parts of the world. And obviously, stability of resources, what they're having to import versus what they have locally available. Labor is going to be different. Biosecurity and security, societal values are going to be different. We heard about that with Dr. Brooks' comments about just looking at euthanasia and the differences with cultural perspectives there. And obviously, there are going to be some differences with consistency if we go from blizzard conditions to nice summer conditions in parts of the world. Okay? So here's an example of what I call a one-of-a-kind barn. This barn I was able to visit about a year and a half ago now, in the Netherlands. Phenomenal facility. They actually had a little viewing area there where you could have a drink and a snack while you look through the windows to these areas that I have pictured here. And they've actually sort of gone back in time and said, you know what, instead of brooding the whole house, we're going to do what they call dark brooders. And so they have these areas where the chicks go underneath them if they need some heat. That's where they have feed and water. And then they come out when they are a little bit older or if they need a little bit cooler area. And as the birds grow, so the dark breeders are here. If you look at sort of that spaceship looking thing there with the red curtain, and as the birds grow and begin to move out, then they have access to platforms and regular feeders and drinkers. So tremendously expensive house, tremendously novel and very innovative design. It's designed like an airplane wing so that the airflow goes up. You can see the whole front of that barn is a set of windows. So they get a lot of natural light. They have very high perches, if you will. They're actually platforms that are about 1 meter wide, and it's fully enclosed. So we don't have time today to give what I call thumbs up, thumbs down on welfare, but I want you to think about that. And is the welfare improved by having this setup? Instead of doing whole house or half house brooding where we have the dark brooders, Is that better for the chicks? Could be. Do we have protection of animal health? Do we have promotion of public health by having them enclosed? I would say yes. Do we have improvement of welfare? I'll leave that question for you all. I'm not going to answer that. Okay. All right. So let's look at another. This was a farm about an hour away. Excuse me. This one had windows as well. These are called pop holes in Europe. And you can see that they can open and close. And so the birds were predominantly indoors, as you can see with that picture, where they had typical feeding and watering equipment. They also had enrichments, which I have circled here as alfalfa bales that were sort of placed in different areas of the barn. But the chickens had the opportunity to go out to what's called a patio garden or a winter garden, which is sort of like a screen porch that has shavings here. And you can see in some cases there were no birds coming out. And in some cases we had a few birds coming out. So my question to you is, have we improved welfare? These birds can go outdoors. They're better protected from predation, better protected from pathogens and disease. They can certainly choose what they want to do by entering and exiting the pop holes when they are opened. But if we look here where I have the arrows, you can see that's where those pop holes are. We've got more light coming in, but we have a space there where the birds are not wanting to sit. Birds tell us with their behavior, with their actions, with their cluck, if you will, where their comfort level is. And so this was a chillier day, the day that we were there. And so these birds were preferentially moving, as you can perhaps see here. I think Shauna mentioned this, that birds like to flock together. So they were preferentially moving out of the way of where that light, where that cooler air was coming in. And when we talked to the farmer, we said, gosh, we don't see many birds going outside in your winter garden. And he said, oh yeah, they don't like to go outside. Well, guess what? There was just shavings out there. And as you can see from the picture, almost the comparison in color here, you can see these birds hardly used it. And so we talked and we said, well, if we wanted them to use it, what can we put out there to motivate them, to give them that choice, to allow them to prefer to go out there? And so that was an interesting discussion about if we want the birds to do this, if we think this is important for welfare, maybe we should put some feed out there, some form of enrichment so the birds will actually want to go out and use that space. Okay? Another innovative design, I saw a model of this about a year ago here in the States. This is used out west in California in some areas. And hopefully this is going to play the video, but this is sort of a mobile chicken house, if you will, that rolls very, very slowly. So you put it out on your cropland or on grass. The birds can be inside. They can come out underneath the curtain. They have feed. They have water. Is welfare improved? I don't know where I live. We have lots of coyotes now and the occasional black bear. I think they would enjoy this. But, you know, we also have the potential challenges when we think about our veterinary oath for preventing suffering, for protecting animal health. And so, again, I think it's an incredible model. It's very innovative, but we always have to think about what is truly best for the birds and not just what's nice from a marketing standpoint or what's going to be creative. I think if we center the birds, center our focus on health and welfare and what we're doing to optimize their conditions and their preferences, we can continue to think about innovation, but in a way that's meaningful. All right. Okay, so we're going to take another side trip with our passport, this time to Southeast Asia. This was in the Philippines, operation I visited several years ago. And this is what I call the New York City style of chicken farming, okay? So they are very limited on land availability. They are very limited on litter quality and availability. They primarily use rice hulls. But when we have episodes globally of avian influenza, rice hulls are a tremendous risk because guess who sits on rice fields before we harvest those rice hulls to bring them into chicken houses? A lot of waterfowl. So in this particular operation, they said, we think rice hulls are too much of a risk. We want to have all the birds inside. And so instead of putting 20,000 birds in a house, they could put about 60,000 birds in a house because they had them in 3 tiers. So if you look here, this is a picture of birds when they're young, and this picture here on the right is birds that I saw when I was older. So this is what they call sort of a colony style. There were about 50 birds per unit, and they are not handled directly even for catching. So for catching, the floor comes apart and they go down on the belt. Air quality in this house, probably the best house that I've been in the world. No ammonia, because they had about 50 tunnel fans operating. They were moving so much air. Some of the best footpad quality that I've ever seen in the world, because guess what? Birds have no exposure to wet litter, and they have no exposure to their poop because it falls through, or it usually falls through. We can see a little bit here. Okay, these birds were marketed at a young age, so we're not growing 7, 8, 10-pound broilers in this operation, but they had about 98% livability, which is really, really good for broilers when we are thinking about this operation. So better for handling, conservation of resources, as I mentioned, but what is it for welfare? When I've shown this picture, particularly with European audiences, they say, but the birds can't dust bathe. That's really important. And I'll say, okay, I agree with you. There are certain behaviors that we want to see, but I think the question is, how do we balance really good positives in each of these models that I've shown you with the potential negatives? And I think welfare is not always a silver bullet. We can't say we are going to achieve every single thing every time. But as I'm going to show you in just a minute, we want to talk about progress and not perfection. Okay, so building a welfare program, this is something I did for many years, and now I work with different companies supporting them, and I call this from the boots on the ground to the C-suite, trying to move something forward. So if you build it, is it going to last? I think that aligns with what Dr. Walker was talking about, but also do you have that all-in support, and actually have you integrated it into all aspects of your operation? And I think that's something we have to consider when we're going to think about having success in welfare programs and really moving the needle on welfare for the animals in our care. So the reality is, it is hard. You have to get that buy-in. You have to focus on that synergy of different departments. You may be the one-man band if you are the animal welfare officer or the veterinarian charged with leading welfare, but you really have to get the involvement from a diverse group of leaders that are at or in all the different operations, and know that welfare is a long-term strategy. So we think about the goals, what we want to do, what are what I call the skeletons in the closet, things that we know that could be a problem, and how can we improve those, okay? So again, it's not an easy exercise. I'm not gonna promise you that you're always gonna get lots of cheers and support when you walk into a room, or people that are glad to see you when you show up on a farm. But I think if we can think about really what our goals are and how we want to help farmers do better and be better, and how we want to help them be more efficient and have better quality animals, healthier animals, then that will help us achieve our goals, okay? One of the questions that I get a lot of times in my current role and I had in my past role is, well, what's that return on investment? If we do this, how is this going to help me get more eggs? If I do this, can you promise me that I'm going to have less DOAs? If I do this, am I going to have less broken wings? I don't know about you all. I like to play poker, but I'm not going to take a bet like that for anybody. So I can't always confirm that there is a sound payback, but I know if we're doing things right, and if the farmers say, I like this, this makes sense, my birds seem to enjoy it, it helps them be more invested in the care of their animals, I think that can make a huge difference in what we're doing. When we are talking about welfare, it is a developing pathway. Some of the folks that I work with now have sort of that pothole view of what welfare is like, and they just see, oh my gosh, we have so much to do. And then there are other folks that I'm working with in other parts of the world that pretend like they're on the Autobahn, and they've got a program, and they've got audits, and they've got an advisory panel, and they've got everything going. And then most folks are somewhere here in the middle where they see that they're going, but they recognize that there are other starting points that they need to consider, and maybe there's something around that corner of the road that they need to be aware of, and thinking ahead from sort of a forward-looking risk reduction standpoint. So a lot of times what I try to focus on is thinking about that baseline, trying to do the right thing with what we have now, trying to really focus on defining welfare and implementing that or advancing that, but then thinking about how we're going to evolve based on the data and the outcomes that we're measuring, and how do we communicate that so that it's going to be a lasting program and we're going to continue to see progress. Okay, so I am from South Carolina. That's where I live now. And Clemson is the king of football there. So this is from Dabo, Bring Your Own Guts, BYOG. Maybe I should have called this Boots on the Ground, BOTG. But really the philosophy there is by bringing your own guts, or BYOG, you have to be accountable, you have to build trust, and you have to build transparency in what you're doing. So in the QA team that I used to work with, we talked about trusting but verifying. We know what we expect, but we have to inspect what we expect to make sure that we actually are achieving those goals. And I think welfare is there as well. And this is just a quick slide from Charlie Arnott talking about the trust model and how we have to think about who's influencing. If I am a one-man band for welfare, or right now as a consultant advisor for welfare, I have to think about who is influencing the people at the farms, at the hatcheries for transport. I have to make sure that they share the same values that we're talking about from a welfare program. What are our goals? What are our outcomes? And then we have to make sure that they are calibrated, that they understand how to monitor, how to measure, and how to do something when it's not going right. So I can't be the fixer in all situations, but I have to help facilitate that thinking process. If this happens, okay, now what are we going to do to try to remedy that or try to mitigate that situation? So I think all of that builds trust within the system and particularly within the team when we're talking about a welfare program. So a lot of times when we think about welfare, people think about it as this balance beam where you have cost, you have health, and you have production. So what's the cost per pound to the plant? What's the cost of an egg produced? What is it going to cost if I need to implement this new vaccine? And we're going to talk about that with metapneumovirus shortly, and what the cost has been for the disease situation. But then we also think about, well, there are all these programs and things that people want us to do with welfare, with QA, with what the consumer wants or what the supply chain wants and what the sustainability team wants. And I'm a big believer in that there are some trade-offs. Welfare is, as I mentioned before with those different farm examples, we have to think about the trade-offs with those different examples and really what we're aiming to achieve. But, not going that quick. But we also have to think about maybe it's more like a roadmap and the synergy there. That welfare is a component of that decision-making. Sustainability is a component of that decision-making and not just basing everything on cost. All right, so let's talk quickly about enrichments. When we think about enrichments, that is probably one of the hottest topics, I think, in animal welfare and different species groups, different farms, different operations. And the questions I always have is we have to consider the biology and the physiology of the bird and the bird's conformation, their age, their safety, and then perhaps in some cases their maturation. Are we talking about very young birds that are 4, 5, 6 weeks old, or are we talking about hens that are 40 to 50 weeks old? And the question that I get a lot of times, and I like to ask is, okay, we put this in, are they going to use it? How are they going to use it? When are they going to use it? Why do we think they're using it? They're not going to talk to us specifically, but we can think about why they're using it. And then what benefits does it have? And so I'm going to highlight some things here for you in the next photos for broilers and for breeders. Okay, so when we think about progress over perfection for broilers, probably going back 10 or 12 years ago, people were hanging things like CDs and little nuts and bolts and things from water lines and thinking that that was providing enrichment. And what we found in a lot of cases were the birds would absolutely ignore them. It looked pretty, it collected dust, but the birds thought, yeah, not important. But if you look at this picture from the UK, we have sort of an X-style perch, we have straw bales, and then we have windows. What are the birds doing with that straw bale? Are they perching on top of it? No. they're actually sitting next to it. So people started to think, instead of just putting something in a barn and saying, hey, I did good, I provided the enrichment, the switch was flipped and people said, what behaviors do we want to see? What is normal for a chicken? What is normal for a broiler chicken that maybe is not going to get above 6 weeks of age? And so we started to look at things like shelter. These chicks are placed on farms. They don't have mama, but we know from natural settings, perhaps backyard settings, that the birds will sit next to mama. So if we put these huts in, or if we put something in like a straw bale or a shavings bale, the birds will sit next to it. And a lot of times when they get a little bit older, then they will start to peck and forage with it. But this is a picture from another farm in Europe. Let's see if this video. Okay. So a couple things to notice here. You see huts, you see some things hanging, and this is a bar. It's supposed to be a perch bar. Do you see a single chicken on that bar? No, but they provided it. So again, why, how, when are birds going to use it? If they're not going to use it, have we really enriched their life? Okay, so I think if we think about progress over perfection, it's great to try things, but we also have to think about what makes sense. All right, so here's some pullet videos. These are going to be a little bit dark because they are in a pullet barn, but hopefully you can see these birds moving. So this was a trial that I did years ago at a commercial GP farm. And we know that the birds will perch on water lines, but we don't want that because that can create other welfare problems like water line breaks. And so our goal is really to say, okay, if birds want to perch, if that's their preference and their motivation, what can we provide? And so we actually built a platform, and what you probably can't see here with the video is the birds like to be above it and they also like to be below it. We said, okay, well, that's really interesting, or they like to sit next to it. And so ultimately what we went with were these big hen steps or baskets. And as you can see, the birds will freely choose to sit on top of it. And we also did motivation testing. So when we walked past them, and we would see how quickly they would come back and get on. And we found within seconds, the females in particular would do that. Now the males, a lot of times ignored them, which was interesting. Again, why the difference? We don't know, but for females, they really like to use those. Okay? So the other thing is learning from others. This was, some of these pictures are from the National Zoo that I had the chance to visit with family this summer. And I was really curious. We went to the panda exhibit, saw lots of really interesting communication about enrichments, and also witnessed some of the enrichments that you can see here for this panda. But then we also walked through the farmyard area at the National Zoo in Washington, and this was what they had for the chickens. And I just laughed and I said, I think they are trying everything they can possibly think of for those chickens. And I don't know that they're putting the same emphasis on chickens that they are on the pandas to really monitor. They had an entire room with about 20 different TV monitors and round-the-clock monitoring to see what that panda was doing, where it was, what activity, et cetera. And the chickens did not have that same level of interest. But, you know, I have a picture here of layers. We're starting to use pecking blocks more with breeders. And we're suspending those because we know that the birds will like to move around and use them instead of just putting them on the floor. We have pictures here of a giraffe, thinking about normal behavior for the giraffes to forage. And then certainly the cow picture there with the brush. So what can we learn from other industries? Are we going to put a rolling brush in a chicken house? I don't think so, but we've never tried it. So I don't know, Jen, if that's next project for you after pigs, but I always think it's interesting just to look and learn from others, because I think enrichments are something that will improve the quality of life. But we have to think about how they're using it, where they're using it, when they're using it, and why, and is it really bringing benefit to the animal? All right, so the 3M approach, I'm going to finish up here, Shauna, hopefully pretty quickly. But this is what I call the 3M approach. So if you want to simplify animal welfare to how you can really make a difference, anytime you walk into a barn or an operation, the first thing is monitoring. Look, listen, observe, put your boots on the ground, spend some time with the animals, with the caretakers, ask questions, be curious. The second thing is measuring. Actually take a sample and use a standard so that you are consistent at each farm that you visit and other people are being consistent. So when we talk about chickens, we're talking about measuring foot pads, we're talking about measuring broken wings, We did that training with Paco in the last 2 days here, talking about how to sample at the processing plant and using a standard so that we could all, 25 of us, could be consistent in what we were measuring. And then finally is managing the data. So evaluate what you are getting, analyze that data, and then take action. There is nothing worse than producing a heck of a lot of data and then it just sits. Do you have to be public facing with it? I think that depends on your corporate policy and your goals. But if you use that data to then return back and say, hey, we're seeing this, so we want to start monitoring this or measuring this, I guarantee you that you will start to make some improvements. And so Temple has famously said you can't manage what you don't measure. And I think that all brings that together very nicely, that we have to think about that 3M approach for welfare. So final thoughts. I am almost done. This is almost the end of my presentation. So as I mentioned previously, animal welfare is a journey, not a destination. I'm excited about what's coming. I think we have to continue to be really bold and curious and think out of the box about what we're doing. Genetics is changing, technology is changing, welfare science and what we know about animals is changing. And so we have lots of opportunities to learn and to work together. And in the space of welfare, I would like to think that it can be pre-competitive. So for those of you all that are new in the business or perhaps new focusing on welfare, build that network. Reach out to people like me, Dr. Walker, Dr. Book, and others. We're happy to chat with you. Sometimes I have folks that just say, can I call you and just chat about welfare? I have a question about this, or I'm hearing about this technology. Absolutely. So please take advantage of that. Share your ideas, ask questions, because working together, we can all make a difference. So with that, I will say thank you.